A black teenager was stopped for simply waiting outside a cafe, accused of loitering without reason. The officer, used to unquestioned control, didn't expect federal agents to step in. But Marcus wasn't alone this time, and neither was the truth. Just wait until you see the quiet power shift that turned this stop into a stunning moment of justice. Marcus Reed stood near the edge of the sidewalk, one sneaker on the concrete, the other resting lightly against the wall behind him. It was just past 8 p.m., and the light from the cafe window spilled across his legs like a stage spotlight. The soft thump of music leaked from his earbud, not loud enough to drown out the hum of traffic or the sound of the police cruiser as it slowed and rolled to a stop beside him. He didn't react at first. Kids in D.C. learned early that sudden moves around cops make people nervous. Instead, he glanced up, expecting a parking question or maybe just a passing look. But when the door swung open and a tall, square-shouldered officer stepped out, Marcus felt the air shift. Officer Blake Carter closed the door behind him with a kind of calm that didn't come from peace, but from power. He scanned the sidewalk like it was his personal property, and his eyes landed on Marcus with unsettling certainty, like he'd already made a decision before even crossing the street. Marcus removed his earbud, polite and alert. "Evening, sir?" Carter didn't respond. He walked closer, his boots deliberate against the pavement. Two fingers tapped against the metal badge on his chest. "Loitering," he said, like it was a sentence already served. There was no greeting, no request for information, just the word, flat, clipped, and full of implication. Marcus blinked. For a second, he genuinely thought Carter must have been talking to someone else. The street was relatively quiet. A couple sat at a patio table inside the cafe. A delivery guy rode past on a bike. The book under Marcus's arm was starting to slip, so he adjusted it and spoke slowly. "I'm waiting for my sister. She works inside. Just got off at 8. I'm not." The officer's gaze moved over Marcus in slow, practiced motion. Hoodie, dark skin, worn backpack with a frayed strap. A single scuff mark on his sneaker that probably told Carter nothing and everything. He didn't ask for a name. He didn't ask for an explanation. "Hands on the hood," he said. Marcus's mouth opened slightly, then closed. A chill of disbelief climbed up the back of his neck. His heartbeat wasn't fast yet, but it felt heavier, like it had to push harder with every beat. He looked toward the cafe window. He wondered if his sister had seen anything, if someone had. "I didn't do anything," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice neutral, measured, respectful. Carter stepped a little closer. His hand hovered near his belt, not reaching, just reminding. Marcus stayed still, not out of guilt, out of calculation. The math of survival in moments like this never changes. Movement equals risk. Words can help, but only if the person listening wants to hear them. He raised his hand slowly, trying not to seem reluctant, but also not surrendering too easily. The hood of the cruiser was warm from the engine, and it startled him when his palms touched it. His paperback slipped from under his arm and landed spine first on the sidewalk with a dull slap, pages fluttering. Neither of them looked at the book. Carter stood behind him now, not saying anything, just watching, controlling the space. Marcus focused on his breathing, on the seconds ticking by, on the knowledge that his sister was only a few feet away through glass and tile and steam. He had done nothing wrong. But right now, that didn't seem to matter. And that was the first moment Marcus felt it. Not fear exactly, not yet, but the recognition that something unfair had just been set into motion, something that could go anywhere, and he had no idea how or when it would stop. Officer Blake Carter hadn't started his shift with a plan to confront a teenager, but the tension had been building for weeks, fed by constant emails from the K Street Business Watch, subject lines like "new loiterers again," "uncomfortable activity near benches," or the one that finally tipped him, "if the police won't help, we'll call the mayor." The messages weren't subtle, and whether they knew it or not, the residents were keeping score. So Carter started keeping one too. Each person moved along, each body no longer cluttering a storefront, felt like a point in a silent game. He never asked who the players were. He just made sure he was winning. He saw Marcus and didn't see a kid. He saw a figure, still and solitary, fitting the vague shape of every complaint in his inbox. Someone lingering, someone making people feel unsafe, someone not buying anything, not moving. That was enough. Marcus, for his part, had already explained twice. "My sister works here. Her name's Alyssa. She just texted me to wait out front." Carter jotted notes on a notepad like they were courtroom testimony. He didn't ask for the phone, didn't verify the sister's name, just wrote one line after another, slowly, like the act of writing made it real. The pen scratched down basic facts: height, estimated weight, hoodie color, but his tone was detached, clinical, like he wasn't writing about a person at all, but a puzzle piece in a crime that hadn't happened yet. The street around them stayed mostly quiet. A couple walking their dog crossed to the far side. A young woman in business clothes stopped under a street lamp and angled her phone toward the scene, the screen catching a shimmer of light. She didn't say anything, just recorded, like hundreds had done before her, just in case. Marcus felt all of it, the weight of the silence, the shift in the officer's body language, the burn of being reduced to a threat. He wasn't angry yet, not all the way, but something darker was rising. The knowledge that he could say everything right and it still wouldn't matter. Then came the touch. Carter didn't yank or shout. He didn't need to. He reached for Marcus's elbow with firm fingers and tried to turn him toward the hood again. It was meant to look procedural, routine, safe. But Marcus felt the message loud and clear. It wasn't about control of the moment. It was about control of him. As Carter spun him, Marcus's book, the one he'd been holding carefully the whole time, slipped from under his arm. It hit the pavement with a soft thud and slid beneath the cruiser's front tire, half buried in the shadow of the wheel. Neither of them looked down. Carter didn't notice. Marcus did. And something in him went still. It wasn't rage, not exactly, not yet, not yet. It was more like a click, a recognition, the realization that the officer saw him not as someone's brother, not as a reader waiting patiently outside a cafe, but as an inconvenience to be managed, a nuisance with no context. He thought about pulling his arm away, thought about raising his voice, but then he heard it, his mother's voice, not in the air, but in his mind. The way she said it every time he left the house. "Live the stop, survive the stop. We can fight it later, but only if you come home." So he didn't pull, he didn't speak. He swallowed the flare of emotion that threatened to rise. Inside the cafe, the steam from the espresso machine hissed like a warning. Marcus stared at the back of the cruiser, jaw clenched, pulse racing. And behind him, Carter flipped another page on his pad, as if the story was already written. But Marcus knew better. This wasn't the end of anything. It was only the middle. Across the street, Agent Dana Collins stood with her back to a stone pillar, eyes moving in slow, practiced sweeps. The candidate they were assigned to protect had already entered the building through a secured side entrance, leaving Collins and her partner, Agent Luis Herrera, to hold the perimeter. It was supposed to be routine, just a few more minutes of watchful silence before the motorcade returned and swept their protectee away. But her gaze caught something, a small gesture that didn't fit. The scene across the street looked ordinary at first, a police officer standing close to a teenager. But the body language, the stiffness in the kid's shoulders, the way he pressed his lips together like he was holding in a wave of emotion, felt off. She narrowed her eyes. The officer's movements were sharp, quick, not coordinated, but charged. And the boy looked cornered. Collins didn't move immediately. Observation always came first. Street stops were common. They didn't usually concern federal agents. But training kicked in. Not just tactical, but personal. She had seen something like this before. Only then it was her younger brother, 15, sitting on a bench at a transfer station. Someone thought he fit a vague description. That stop had ended in apologies, but only after it left a permanent mark on the way her brother carried himself in public. Now, across the street, she could almost feel the temperature rising. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," the officer barked. Collins flinched inwardly. The tone was hard, too hard for the situation. The boy obeyed, slowly. His eyes rose with a mixture of anger and fear, a storm just below the surface. His voice cracked, but it held. "Sir, I didn't do anything." The officer's hand dropped to his duty belt, fingers curling around a cuff case. His body shifted half a step forward. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to change everything. That was the pivot. Collins didn't wait for another signal. She crossed the street with precision, not rushing, but with purpose in every step. Her blazer opened just enough to reveal her badge clipped to her belt. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Not loud, not emotional, but clear enough to cut through the air. "Officer," she said, "Agent Dana Collins, United States Secret Service. What's the probable cause here?" Carter blinked. He didn't turn, but his posture stiffened. His hand hovered over the cuffs, uncertain now. Collins was already beside him. Her partner, Agent Herrera, moved in step behind her, silent but present. He positioned himself slightly to the right, eyes locked on Carter's hands. Not threatening, just ready. Two more agents emerged from the sidewalk's edge, plainclothes but unmistakable. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They formed a quiet arc around the scene, like a subtle barrier had been drawn between the officer and the boy. No one was shouting. No one needed to. But the sidewalk had changed. The invisible line between power and protection had shifted. Carter, still holding the cuffs in his hand, suddenly felt the attention land on him like weight. The badge on his chest didn't feel quite so steady now. His fingers relaxed just slightly. The cuff case stayed open, but the next move never came. Around them, bystanders who had averted their eyes before began to shift forward. The woman with the phone raised it higher, her screen reflecting Collins' calm face. A man near the curb muttered something under his breath. The cafe door creaked open a few inches. People were seeing, really seeing. And Carter, consciously or not, felt it. The pressure of being watched not just by civilians, but by people who carried the same authority he thought insulated him. People trained to observe, trained to act if necessary. Collins kept her eyes on him, even as she spoke gently toward the teenager. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus," he said, still facing the cruiser, his voice lower now, guarded. "Marcus," she repeated. "You can step away from the vehicle. You're not under arrest." Carter said nothing. He didn't have to. His silence said more than he realized. And in that stillness, something shifted, not just in the power dynamic, but in the very air around them. It was the kind of moment that didn't make the news, didn't go viral on its own. But for Marcus, it was everything. It meant the rules had changed, that someone had stepped in, that the weight on his back might not crush him this time. And for Carter, it meant the room for quiet dominance had vanished. He was no longer alone on the field. The circle had tightened, and this time it was around him. Carter's lips curled into a smile, or something close to it. But the gesture never reached his eyes. It was mechanical, like he'd practiced it in a mirror once to avoid looking rattled. "Just doing my job," he muttered, voice flat but defensive. The words lingered in the air, hollow and weightless. Agent Collins didn't blink. She tilted her head slightly toward Marcus without taking her gaze off Carter. Her voice remained calm, not condescending, not forceful, but unshakably clear. "Is he under arrest?" The question hung there like a cord waiting for resolution. Carter paused, then replied with a word that instantly felt out of place, even to him. "For loitering." He said it quickly, reflexively, as if hoping the phrase would carry some kind of shield. But the moment the word left his mouth, it seemed to shrink under the weight of the silence that followed. He heard it land, heard how weak it sounded, how much it didn't belong in this moment. Herrera stepped in, his posture changing subtly. No aggression, just presence. He moved a half-inch closer, enough for Carter to feel, not enough to be challenged. His tone was formal, measured, and precise. "Officer," he said, like someone reading from a statute, "you're detaining a minor on a public sidewalk. Absent reasonable suspicion of a specific criminal act, this qualifies as an unlawful stop." It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder, and that made it more powerful. Marcus turned slightly, his shoulders squaring for the first time since the stop began. His voice was low, but there was heat in it now. Controlled, but real. "My sister works in there," he said, nodding toward the cafe. "She's on bar clothes. I'm waiting like she told me to." The truth was simple, undeniable. And now it wasn't just Marcus saying it. The woman who had been filming stepped forward, her phone still steady in her hand. "He's been here 15 minutes, she said, her voice clear. Behind her, the cafe door opened with a small chime. A young barista stepped outside, apron still tied around her waist, her eyes moving from Marcus to Carter to the agents. She looked nervous, but only for a second. Then her chin lifted. "That's my coworker's brother," she said. "He's not doing anything wrong." The atmosphere shifted. What had once been a scene some tried to ignore was now a small circle of truth. The crowd's posture changed. Phones were no longer hidden behind bags or held discreetly. They were raised, purposeful. The air held a different energy now, one Carter couldn't control. He was no longer the only voice in the room. Collins took a small step forward, not as a challenge, but as a conclusion. "We're not your supervisors, officer," she said evenly, "but we are federal law enforcement. And we're on a protective assignment that requires situational control. We need you to de-escalate, now, and step back." Her words weren't loud, but they landed with the full weight of authority. Carter looked at her, then at Herrera, then at the others, agents in position, watching. The silent pressure of being outnumbered wasn't what broke him. It was something more intimate. The cameras, the witnesses, the possibility that this one moment could define him. He felt it then, the creeping awareness that this wasn't about Marcus anymore. It was about him, about how he would be remembered in the next 10 minutes. The impulse to keep pushing flickered behind his eyes, the need to save face, to reassert control. But he hesitated. His jaw clenched once. His fingers twitched at the cuff case. And then, slowly, deliberately, he let it go. The metal cuffs slid back into their pouch with a soft but distinct click, the sound of something ending before it could begin. It wasn't an apology, but it was close, and it was enough in that moment to shift the ground beneath everyone's feet. Not a victory, not yet, but a reckoning. Quiet, measured, real. When Officer Carter let go, he didn't say a word, but the shift was immediate. The release of physical control, that quiet, unseen pressure Marcus had been holding in his muscles and bones, left him off balance for a half second. He didn't stumble, but his body swayed just enough to reveal what had been holding him up. Tension, fear, and the determination to stay still no matter what. Agent Collins noticed. Without a word, she stepped past Carter, crouched beside the front tire of the cruiser, and reached underneath. Her gloved fingers closed around the paperback, bent, dusty, the edges frayed just slightly from where it had slid across the street. She stood, brushed it off with her palm, and handed it back to Marcus. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded, almost automatically, but his eyes shimmered with the adrenaline that still pulsed through his system. Not fear, not anymore, just the residue of standing his ground and not knowing if it would be enough. Agent Herrera turned toward Carter. His voice was quiet, nearly conversational, but it carried weight. "For the record," he said, "kids on a curb are not your enemy." It wasn't a warning, not a threat. It was something simpler, a sentence that might echo in Carter's mind later, when the night was over and the noise had faded. A sentence that might matter once the spotlight moved on. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps on tile. The cafe door slammed open. "Alyssa," someone called from inside, but she was already out the door. Alyssa Reed, still in her apron, still holding a towel in one hand, rushed toward Marcus. Her face was drawn with worry, her breath short from sprinting through the back kitchen. "Marcus!"
She wrapped her arms around him before he could speak, pulling him in close. Her hand found the back of his neck, steadying him in the way only Oda's sisters can. Her eyes darted to the officers, to the agents, to the small crowd now gathered around with their phones raised like lanterns. And in that moment, Marcus felt something leave him. Not the memory of what happened, but the anger that had burned so hot inside his chest. It didn't vanish, it settled, turned into something quieter, something more solid. Not triumph, but something that would last longer. He had been seen, he had been believed. Across the sidewalk, Carter turned slightly, lifting his radio to say something routine, anything routine. Words that would pull him back into protocol, away from the moment that had unraveled in front of cameras and agents and witnesses. And for the first time, as he looked over his shoulder, he didn't see just a kid in a hoodie. He saw a teenager with a life, a sister clocking out of work, a backpack slung low on his shoulder, a book he'd held onto like it mattered more than the world noticing him. It wasn't enough to change everything, but it was enough to make him pause. The agents began to move again, pulling back toward their original post across the street. No fanfare, no speeches. The circle that had formed, so precise, so deliberate, dissolved quietly, like mist retreating with the morning. Collins gave Marcus one last look. Not a stare, not a command, just a nod, quiet, certain, respectful. A gesture that said, "We saw what you saw. We stood where we needed to stand." And then they were gone. Later, as Alyssa and Marcus walked home under the city's amber streetlights, the tension melted into the rhythm of their footsteps. Alyssa ranted, pacing through her anger like it might keep him safe. Then she laughed at herself, sharp, tired laughter that cracked through the nerves. Finally, she went quiet. Marcus turned the book over in his hands, rubbing a thumb across the creased cover. "You think he's going to get in trouble?" he asked. Alyssa exhaled. "Maybe not today," she said, "but he'll think twice." That night, the video made its way through group chats and timelines. A silent clip, no music, no edits. Just a boy standing at the edge of a sidewalk. A pair of hands reaching for cuffs. Then a slow, undeniable shift in power. It didn't come with fireworks, but in a city used to blurred lines and forgotten names, it landed like something rare. A clean verdict. Not against a man, but against a moment. A decision, a misjudgment that, for once, was stopped before it spiraled. And for Marcus, that was enough. Not to fix the system, but to remember that sometimes just being believed was the most powerful outcome of all.